All right, today we're diving into the world of one of the 20th century's most fascinating thinkers, Albert Camus. We're going to explore his lifelong mission to answer a huge question. How do we find meaning in a universe that seems to offer none? So let's get into it. Right off the bat, you can see Camus does not pull any punches. He starts with the highest stakes imaginable. For him, philosophy wasn't some stuffy academic exercise. Nope. It was about staring down the most fundamental choice any of us can make. Is this life actually worth living? Everything he ever wrote really springs from this one question. And this is the man himself, photographed the same year he won the Nobel Prize. And you have to understand, he wasn't your typical brooding philosopher locked away in some ivory tower. This was a guy who was a journalist, a resistance fighter during World War II, a passionate football goalie. He was a man whose entire philosophy was forged in the real world. To really get Camus, you have to get where he came from. See, his philosophy wasn't born in the gloomy cafes of Paris. It was born under the brilliant, almost punishing sun of French Algeria. His life was just full of these intense contrasts. He was a pied noir, that's a person of European descent born in colonial Algeria, and he grew up in serious poverty. His dad was killed in World War I before he could even know him. His mother, who he adored, was nearly deaf and couldn't read or write. But at the same time, his world was filled with this incredible physical joy. The Mediterranean Sea, the sun on his skin, the love of swimming and playing football. And that tension right there between the raw beauty of life and its brutal hardship, that is the key to everything he would later write. So his world was really shaped by two big forces. On one hand, you have the land itself, French Algeria, this vibrant place on the African continent. And on the other, you have the institution that completely opened his mind, the University of Algiers. And that's where he started to find the words and the ideas to make sense of the world he was living in. You know, even with all this success, Camus never, ever forgot the people who helped him. As a poor kid, everyone expected him to just go into manual labor. But his elementary school teacher, a man named Louis Germain, saw something special in him and fought for him to continue his education. Years later, when he won the Nobel Prize, the very first person he wrote to, after his mom, was that teacher. So it's out of this life, a life of both sun and struggle, that Camus develops his most famous idea, an idea he called the absurd. So what exactly is the absurd? It's really important to get this right. It's not that the world is absurd, and it's not that we are absurd. The absurdity comes from the clash, the collision between our deep, very human need for meaning and answers, and a universe that is just completely silent. We're screaming our questions into the cosmos. Why are we here? What's the point? And all we get back is silence. Right, so the key thing to remember is that the absurd is a relationship. It's a confrontation. Imagine showing up for a duel and your opponent just never arrives. That feeling of disconnect, that sensation of being a stranger in the only home you'll ever have, that is the heart of the absurd condition. And Camus was really methodical about exploring this one big idea. He created what he called cycles of work. His first cycle was all about the absurd, and it included a novel, The Stranger, a big philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, and a play, Caligula. He was basically attacking the same problem from every possible angle. Okay, so if life has no built-in meaning, and the universe doesn't care, we're right back at that first terrifying question, why not just check out? Well, Camus had an answer, and it's a powerful, rebellious, life-affirming one. And this is the big turning point. Camus says that realizing life is absurd isn't the end of the road, it's the very beginning. The proper response isn't to give up. The answer is to live in a state of constant conscious revolt against it. It's about living your life in spite of the cosmic indifference. Now, Camus makes a really crucial distinction here, especially in his book The Rebel. He draws a sharp line between rebellion and revolution. For him, rebellion is personal. It's a moral protest. It's about looking at injustice and saying no. Revolution, on the other hand, he saw as incredibly dangerous. It often aims for absolute power and ends up justifying horrible things, murder, tyranny, all in the name of some distant future paradise. So what does this rebellion actually look like day to day? Well, for Camus, it breaks down into three things. First, passion. Live as much and as intensely as you can. Squeeze every drop out of life. Second, freedom. Always fight for your personal and intellectual freedom against anything that tries to crush it. And finally, and this is so important, solidarity. You have to recognize that your rebellion isn't just about you. It's about affirming a shared human dignity, realizing we are all in this absurd boat together. But this wasn't just theory for Camus. His ideas were constantly being put to the test by his own life and the incredibly turbulent politics of his time. You know, you often hear Camus lumped in with the existentialists, but he actually rejected that label his entire life. And the main reason comes down to a big disagreement with his frenemy, Jean-Paul Sartre. See, Sartre believed we're radically free to invent our own values from scratch, but Camus insisted there's a common human nature, a shared dignity. For him, a revolt against the absurd isn't some lonely solo project. It's something we do together. And this disagreement eventually blew up their famous friendship. And then came the ultimate test, the Algerian War for independence. This conflict absolutely tore him apart. On one side, he was a pied noir. His family and his roots were there. But on the other, he had always condemned the injustices of French colonialism. He was caught right in the middle, unable to fully support either side's violence. This might be his most famous and controversial quote. He said it in Stockholm right after winning the Nobel Prize. Someone in the audience challenged him, demanding he support the Algerian independence fighters, who were using terrorism against civilians. And Camus's response was a flat-out rejection of any ideology that justifies killing innocent people. For him, the abstract concept of justice could never be more important than the real, living, breathing person of his mother. So Camus spent his last years wrestling with these massive ideas, both in his writing and in his life. He was building a legacy that would be, in a final and deeply absurd twist, tragically cut short. I mean, think about it. He gets the Nobel Prize at just 44 years old. He's at the absolute peak of his career, working on new novels, directing plays, and then in 1960, at age 46, he dies instantly in a car accident. A shockingly absurd end for the man who taught the world about the absurd. This is his grave, in the south of France. It's just a simple stone, overgrown with rosemary. It's a quiet resting place for a man who found meaning not in some promise of an afterlife, but in the simple, earthy joys of this world. And in one last heartbreaking twist, the manuscript for his next big novel was found in the wreckage of the car. It was called The First Man, and it was an autobiographical story about his childhood in Algeria. In the end, he was circling right back to where it all began. But if you had to boil his entire philosophy down to one single image, this would be it. The myth of Sisyphus, cursed by the gods to push a huge boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down forever. For Camus, Sisyphus is us. He's the perfect absurd hero. His life is a pointless, hopeless struggle. There's no winning, no finish line. There is only the work itself. And this is where Camus delivers his final incredible insight. Sisyphus knows his fate is meaningless. But in that moment when he walks back down the hill to get the rock again, he's conscious. He is, for a moment, superior to his fate. He can choose to find joy in the struggle itself. He can scorn the gods by loving the rock he pushes. And so the question Camus leaves us with is this. In our own lives, with our own daily boulders to push, how can we too learn to imagine Sisyphus happy?